Welcome, welcome. So glad that all of you are able to join us this afternoon. We appreciate you all taking a little bit of time to spend with us and with the youth team. As I mentioned, as you're coming in, feel free to please introduce yourself in the chat in the youth team style. There are no strangers here, so please let us know who you are and where you're joining from. And get ready to engage, listen, and bring some good questions to the conversation. I am Nia Westbay. I am the director of the youth policy team at CLASP. Really excited to be leading this conversation with you all today. I have been in the director role for maybe 4 months now, but I have been on the team at CLASP for a good 5.5 years. So I've been here for a little while now. And we're gonna just spend a little time today going through where we've been, where we're going, and how you all can partner with us as we think about the power of partnership. With that, I'm going to hand off to Olivia Golden, CLASP Executive Director, to greet you all and share a few of her thoughts on the youth team's journey.
Thank you so much, Nia, and it's an honor to welcome everybody on behalf of CLASP. This is an incredible group, so thank you for taking the time to join us. I also want to say thank you to Nia and to Acusia Myers on this call, because they and their teams have done an incredible amount of work to put this together. It's going to be such an exciting conversation. Our goal in the conversation is to offer you an overview of the youth policy advocacy that's going on at CLASP at a moment of incredible urgency. It's a moment when young people have been particularly hard hit by the last 18 months of pandemic and recession. And of course, it's a moment when the pandemic and the recession have shown a very bright light on the devastation that was in many people's lives going into that period. Long before 2020, young people were disproportionately suffering from racism and economic injustice, high levels of unemployment, more likely than older Americans to live in poverty, and a range of other systemic challenges. So fixing these systemic failures is crucial, not just to young people themselves, but to the nation's future. And that's why this is core work for CLASP. It's also core for us that the voices of young people are critical to shaping the solutions. Their energy, their creativity, their vision of the future are crucial to where we go. So my assignment from Nia in just these first few minutes is to review really quickly how CLASP got into this work and how it's shaped more than our youth advocacy alone. It's shaped us as an organization. CLASP has a rich history of work on youth policy. I think in just a moment, you're going to see a video clip from Linda Harris, who created the youth team. And she did that together with Alan Hausman, who I know was planning to be on this call, who was CLASP director at the time. And they created it almost 20 years ago. So CLASP, as you may know, is a mature adult of 52. We were founded as an organization in 1969. The youth team is a young adult of something like 18. The early focus when Linda first created the team was on employment and on education, with a particular focus on opportunity youth not in school or in work. So over the almost 2 decades of its existence, the youth team and CLASP as a whole have evolved in parallel. And the youth team has often pioneered really crucial approaches and insights that have been useful across our work. So just a few key headlines of what's happened in those years. The first piece, which I think many of you know and are connected to, is that the youth policy work has broadened out, drawing on deep partnerships with our other policy teams at CLASP to place young people at the center of a range of policy issues that really matter to them. So for example, health and mental health, income supports like refundable tax credits, work on good jobs, a huge issue for young people is having crummy, badly paid jobs, work on 2-generational policies like childcare. So the team has evolved in its own breadth and in its connections to the agenda across CLASP. And by the way, that's had some really interesting effects in our advocacy. Dewey Pham, who you see on this call, who'll speak later, was actually invited to one of the very first in-person events at the White House with a couple of our change makers to talk about the youth agenda across everything. So it's really made a difference in terms of impact. Second broad area of development is that the youth policy team pioneered a deeply thoughtful approach to engaging young leaders and people with lived experience in the policy areas. So probably for 4 or 5 years, the team was exploring and developing a multifaceted young adult engagement strategy with partners, with an advisory board. And then, as many of you on this call know, we were thrilled to partner with a group of funders to take that to the next level with the New Deal for Youth and our core group of almost 40 change makers. I know you're going to hear from 2 of them in a moment. And that's been really exciting. The youth engagement work, the involvement of people with lived experience has had an impact across class. It's helped other policy teams develop their strategy, and it's affected our governance. Because of advocacy from the youth team, our board has actually added 2 young adult members, which has had a powerful effect on our governance. And in fact, just to give you one example on my mind a lot right now, I think you all know that I'll be stepping down in the spring of 2022 or in the first quarter. And so there's a board search committee, which is really important to our future. And one of our young adult members is on that search committee. So the advocacy for including young leaders has really had an impact. And finally, CLASP's racial equity policy journey has been intertwined at many points with the work of the youth team. Young people as a generation are very diverse, more diverse than older adults, about half people of color. So the youth team really understood early that you can't be about advocacy without having racial equity centered in partnership with the anti-poverty agenda. And all of CLASP's teams have really been developing this work, but many of our most recognizable and powerful strategies are connected to the youth team. So for example, many of you probably read the powerful policy report from, I think, 3 or 4 years ago called Unjustice, which called out the policies of the Trump administration that have targeted young people of color. And what was particularly new about it for CLAS is that it wasn't just about policies or technical things, it was also about narrative and the way narrative was demeaning and dehumanizing young people of color. And that's been a really important lesson for us. So with that introduction to the really important work of my youth policy colleagues, I want to turn the mic back to Nia. I'm looking forward so much to hearing the rest of this conversation because it's an amazing group of people on this call, and I couldn't think of a better way to spend the afternoon. Nia?
Thanks so much, Olivia, for getting us started and for sharing those reflections. So now we're going to transition into a little bit of where we've been, as well as a little bit of where we are now. So we're going to take a look at 2 videos. The first one is from the founder of the youth team, Brenda Perez, talking about sort of the roots of the team and why she thought it was important to do the work. And then we're going to go into a video from our changemakers in the New Deal for Youth work, sharing a bit about why they got involved in that work.
I came in at a time when national legislation was being passed and a lot of the youth funding was being decimated. The voice related to youth work and youth policy was very much siloed, and I thought there was a real opportunity to broaden the coalition. This was outside of the class mold, a lot of the things that I was doing, because it was trying to bring together the national voices, the work on the ground, and lots of disciplines to bear on a broad agenda, not necessarily one legislative agenda, but on a broad agenda.
The barriers to employment that face youth and adults locked out of opportunity are structural. They arise from systems and policies and not individual choices. I urge Congress to create a plan for universal access to education and employment for all young people and individuals impacted by the criminal justice system.
A new deal for youth looks like students actually getting what they need as far as like mental health and other resources that may not be too accessible for them, or resources that they may not know are accessible for them.
It's an opportunity to communicate with other people and hear their opinions on and their thoughts on situations and stuff like that. And it could be really helpful for young people.
I thought it was an amazing opportunity to have changes done on the national level. As someone dealing with mental health problems and who is disabled and autistic.
A new deal for youth looks like reform, liberation, equality, whether it's educational reform, social reform, police reform. There's fairness all around the board.
A new deal for youth looks like so many different things. I think the main thing is having youth being part of making the new deal for youth. Sometimes people can just, make things for people of color and make things for youth without those people actually being involved in it. So actually giving a platform for youth and for people of color to speak.
There's a lot of boundaries when it comes to economic justice. So I think a new deal for youth would take into account all the problems that happens and all the obstacles that happens before you turn 18, before you're a fully an adult, because it all plays together.
A new deal for youth looks like a comprehensive, inclusive, progressive platform to advance and solve the core issues that have been plaguing generations.
To me, a new deal for youth looks like coming together to make big waves and assist with creating political change in a positive aspect.
New deal for youth would look like something that is youth-centered and youth-led, and that can go really in any direction. I think when youth really establish their agency, we can really problematize, what our most urgent needs are.
A new deal looks like higher education for all, Medicare for all, broadband in every household, and ensuring that every aspect of our youth across America are taken care of and guaranteed a quality of life no matter their circumstances.
A new deal for youth is free access to college.
A new deal for youth looks like dismantling all systems of oppression and rebuilding a society that centers communities of all backgrounds where they are listened to and have their needs met.
And a new deal for me looks like a government that is able to not only work with the community, but work with other young individuals to keep the cycle of positive influence going in America, going globally.
This will look like destigmatizing mental health, increasing access and opportunities to help with their mental health, and include new practices that don't just include Western practice.
We came together because we got tired of asking for a seat at the table, and we wanted to make a table. And this table is where all young Americans can eat and benefit at, regardless of gender, regardless of race, sexual orientation, and regardless of religion.
A new deal for youth looks like canceling student debt. Young Black people have been plagued with student debt for years, as much as many student borrowers, and recognizing that when we're thinking about starting a new economy, opening up this world for young people to have access to different resources that are available to all Americans, right? A new deal for youth includes all of us.
To me, a new deal for youth looks revolutionary. It looks like justice. It looks like tearing down barriers that have held down people for so many years to create equitable opportunities for success for all people of every background in America and around the world.
A new deal for youth basically looks like, to me, a lot of youth from a lot of different places coming together and talking about the efforts to, basically let people know, hey, I know that we have systems that are already created, but here's how to kind of spice those up for our young people and many of the different generations that are to come.
We can't wait. We need change now.
All right, everybody. I hope that gave you all a little taste of sort of where we've been and where we are. And I have the pleasure of being joined by 4 fabulous panelists who are going to help me to go a little bit deeper into some of what you all just saw in the videos. And I'm really excited because this, none of our work is possible without partnership. We can't do these things by ourselves. And the people that I brought here with me today are going to help me share with you all a little bit about what that looks like, what that means, and how we're advancing each other's work by being in community with each other. So I am going to ask my panelists to introduce themselves because they can do it far better than I could, but we'll also drop their bios in the chat to, so you have a little bit more formal information. But I'm going to ask everybody to get us started, to introduce themselves, to say, who you are, what you do, and how you first got connected to CLASP. And I'm going to go to my friend Monica in Denver to kick us off.
I knew that was coming. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. My name is Monica Badgett. I am a senior management analyst with Denver Workforce Services here in Denver, which is a part of the Denver Economic Development and Opportunity Office. I literally have worked in training and development for about 27 years and now have made a data pivot, just the integration of both. We have actually been able to have partnership with CLASP since about 2017. And I can definitely say it's probably one of the best decisions that we've made, and just in collaboration and partnership. Thank you.
Thanks, Monica. And next, I'm going to go to Joseph.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Yusuf. I'm from Washington, D.C. I am a New Deal for Youth changemaker, a creative, and I am also a events and facilities coordinator for Howard University. How did I come about with CLASP? I was recommended to join a group via another partnership that I have with an organization titled Generation Hope.
Great, thanks, Joseph. And next, I'm going to go to you, Brenda. Share a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Brenda Perez. I'm originally from Mexico, but I've been in DC since I was 10 years old. So I'm kind of like a Mexican Washingtonian. I'm also a New Deal for Youth changemaker. I'm a grassroots immigration organizer. I do environmental work. Right now I work for DC government at their Office of Urban Agriculture. And the way that I got introduced to CLASP was through one of the CLASP team members, Marlene. And we got connected at this conference called the Opportunity Youth Network, where I was doing a presentation on immigration and she was leading a presentation on health. And we were just kind of listening to our presentations and we just kind of like felt each other's energy and enthusiasm for the topics. And I remember after the conference, we were standing outside of the building, just like talking about like all the many different ways in which we can build with one another. So that's how I got introduced to CLASP, and now I'm here.
Awesome, thanks, Brenda. And last but not least, so Dewey, I noticed you work here, but I would still love to hear your CLASP origin story.
Thanks, Tia. Hi, everybody. It's great to be here. I'm Dewey Pham. I'm a policy analyst on the CLASP team, and I lead the justice work that sits on the youth policy team, which really focuses kind of on the intersection across economic justice, the criminal legal system, workforce development, and of course, young people. Actually, I got first introduced to CLASP. My first job after undergrad was working at a policy organization in Denver called the Bell Policy Center. At the time, we were advocating for increasing the options for high school equivalency tests, and CLASP had been doing some work around that and used their report for our testimony and for our advocacy there. So that was kind of my first, and about 5.5 years later, here I am at CLASP and loving it. So really glad to be here.
Thank you all for introducing yourselves. Dewey, I'm going to stay right with you since you just mentioned that you lead our justice work at CLASP and on the team. Can you talk a little bit about what partnership has looked like as we built out that area of work and why that's been important?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the justice work at CLASP is relatively a newer body of work for the organization. We definitely knew from working on youth policy that young people of color especially, were disproportionately impacted by the criminal legal system. And we were hearing from young people themselves that we couldn't really be intentional about this work without direct, explicit focus, especially on anti-poverty, racial justice, without also thinking about the inequitable ways the criminal legal system has targeted these populations. So about 5 or so years ago now, when I first joined, we also understood that there were plenty of criminal justice organizations in DC across the country, and we weren't a traditional criminal justice organization. We really wanted to be more thoughtful about what our role was and how we could add value to the field. And so we were really intentional about for the first couple of years, really kind of embarking on this learning agenda, really trying to figure out what our space was, what our niche was. And where we thought we could add a lot of value was in the kind of the employment pathways space. We had a lot of expertise on the public workforce system, on career pathways, working with working with the public workforce system with populations with high barriers to employment, which people with records were one of the most likely to be unemployed. And so really found our space there. One of the partnerships that we've really grown in over the past 5 years, which we've really leaned on, is with the Justice Roundtable. It's a coalition of about over 100 members across the country. And initially, again, we just started out going to all the meetings, listening in, and over the past several years, we've started to lead the workforce component of the roundtable, collaborating with those organizations to write recommendations on workforce development, to how to make the public workforce system more responsive to serving people with criminal legal records, young people. We've been able to work with with Monica and the other partners in our local areas on strategies and partnerships between the public workforce system and the justice or corrections departments. So that's been really crucial. We really lean on them. And I think, again, also bringing in the anti-poverty voice, employment, economic justice voice into the criminal legal space has also been a value add, I think, to the movement.
Thanks, Dewey. And you gave me a great segue for my next question. So I'm going to kick it over to Monica in Denver. So you're connected with CLASP through the Communities Collaborating to Reconnect Youth, or CCRY. Can you tell me a little bit about why are you part of the CCRY network? Why do you take time to do this with us?
Oh my God. The question is, why not? What I've really been able to understand is that when we first joined, we had our then director had been involved with the CRY network in her work in Chicago. And she had made the suggestion at one time, Denver was an advocate, really kind of boots on the ground. And she said, this is a space we still need to be in. I was like, okay, I'll go. Send me, I'll go. And when I say to have different people from different parts of the country who are doing this boots on the ground government work within workforce, because we know that as a government entity, you're dealing with federal dollars, you're dealing with somebody local dollars, who are meeting in a room from different parts of the country, who are having these ongoing conversations about, this is what we've done that have worked with us. This is what hasn't worked. What can you help me with? That was literally ended up being birthed out of not just collaboration and partnership, but it became a family of resources, a family of, hey, I heard you all did for a perfect example. Here in Denver, we had a partnership that we did with a local coffee house. And she did not feel comfortable opening up a coffee house where it looked like it was gentrified. So she said, how can I use this as a training opportunity? She came to Workforce and said, hey, I want to create internships and training where I can literally be able to get young people from the community and train them to be baristas and all this in this house. And so when they can go off, and these are skills that they can actually be obtained to really be able to combat this, she didn't even realize that she was doing anti-poverty work, but this is what she was doing as in her heartbeat. We were able to do this and create curriculum for them, all of this thing, just in a coffee house. I was able to share that with some of our class partners. And when I called him my brother in Pittsburgh, said, Monica, how can we do this? Took the same model, had him connect to the coffee house owner. She was able to help him to really kind of implement and duplicate the same work that they did here at Prodigy. That is unheard of. And when we realize that we have enough children and enough young people to serve around the country, that if I have $2 and you have $3, guess what? We've got $5. It's not my money and your money, it's ours. And now what can we do with the resources that we have in tandem in order that we can help meet needs? And this is across the board with, and I was listening when I was listening to Linda, hearing her talk about the passion, sitting in a room with her, hearing her talk about data gathering. What are we going to do with the data and the information we receive? And having other cities like Nashville say, this is what we've been able to do. This is how we've been able to do it. And seeing that work duplicated. Sitting in an area, I've never in my life have sat in a group of people from all over the country to where it wasn't like, this is what we're doing better than you, but this is what we can do. Let's see if we can do this together. It's unheard of. And I can't, for the life of me, as I was thinking about this presentation today and this panel, I could not think of a better way to actually be able to meet a need that looks unmet. When you have all of these different moving pieces, when you bring them together, there is an intentionality and a power that hits different in every community. And when that begins to ricochet, that influences policy, that influences grassroots level. It even impacts how we were doing work with our community-based organizations, asking them, do you do this? Have you done this? Do you have an inter partner here? Let us help you. And it's just, it's a beautiful opportunity to just really be able to say, I'm not the only one in the room, but if I am, this is the room I need to be in so I don't have to feel that way.
Yeah, I knew I asked the right people to be on this panel. Thank you, Monica. That was beautiful. I call Monica Rev and she calls me Doc as our thing because Monica preaches. So, all right. So I'm going to transition over to our change makers. And Brenda, I'm going to go to you. Although you are a change maker, I first met you when we were working on a Hill briefing focused on young women of color, where you were one of the panelists. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience was like for you and why you decided to engage with us on that?
Yeah, so I was just looking at pictures from that briefing because I wanted to like remind myself, like what was that experience like? And the reality is that I always go back to that experience. I get invited to many spaces where I am supposed to represent or talk about immigration or what it's like to be a person of color in DC or in STEM. But this is probably one of the first opportunities that I had to center my identity as a young woman of color, and everything kind of falls after. And it was really, really powerful. I'm like, it left me with more questions of like, why are we not centering these issues even more within our communities? In the panel, the panel was very diverse. It wasn't about immigration or the environment or STEM. We talked about a lot of issues. I remember me and some of the panelists went into the bathroom and we were just like so excited to talk to one another. And we were just like having these like epic conversations in the bathroom, and like people would come in and like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? And it made me realize also that we don't talk enough about intersection and how a lot of the issues that we focus on are really intersectional issues. And when we were sitting at the panel, I sat with that. I sat with the intersection of all of the work that everybody was doing in the panel and within the room. So in that panel, it came out of nowhere, but like sometimes I just like talk as I'm thinking about things. And in that panel, I really came to a place where I was like, we really can't talk about health without talking about language access. We can't talk about climate without talking about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. We can't talk about immigration without police brutality. Everything is really interconnected. And we have fallen into a place where our communities are so they're just like constantly like fighting one another, and not because we don't have resources, but because the system, like one of the reasons why the system benefits is because our communities are fighting against one another under this mentality of that we lack resources. So it was just like a moment where I was like, this is what I need to be doing. We need to talk more about intersectionality. I specifically organized in DC. One of the work that I started to doing afterwards was really having these conversations around Black and Brown unity. Here in DC is 50% Black and 14% of the population here in DC come from other countries. And that the majority of the immigrant population comes from El Salvador. I'm Mexican, but I'm, so deeply tied to the Salvadorian community here. And we also have a big Ethiopian community. So I really, after that Hill briefing, I was so set on intersectionality. And, you kind of like put on your intersectionality lenses on, and you can't take them off anymore. So after that, I have been a super big advocate of like, yes, let's talk about one issue, but then let's also talk about all of the communities that we're not plugging into this conversation.
Thanks, Brenda. And I think I'm going to stay right with you and just sort of stay on that train, because you are also a New Deal for Youth change maker, where intersectionality is a big piece of that work. Tell us a little bit about what made you want to join a New Deal for Youth when we reached out to you about it.
Yeah, so the person who talked to me about the New Deal for Youth was also Marlene, because I feel like we have this thing of like, okay, let's talk to one another and let's just see where we can create opportunities for one another. And so I remember I had a conversation with Marlene, and I was like, I really love that class. Really creates the platform for this intersectionality to happen. And so she talked to me about the New Deal for Youth, and she asked me, like, how does it sound if I were to invite you to a room where there is, more than 30 leaders from different parts of the country, young people focusing on different issues with different identities that are coming from different walks of life. And I was like, well, if this can happen, great. If it doesn't, it sounds a great idea for the future. So the meetings actually happened, and it's just so incredible, especially during COVID times where you feel so disconnected from everything. Especially from a person focusing on immigration in DC, like our community is so tiny. And sometimes you wonder, like, is everybody, talking about social justice? Like, is anybody else like seeing what I'm seeing? And so I guess I was placed in this meeting with 30 other youth who were having the same questions, who were doing really incredible work. And again, not just about immigration, but about everything else. So it is such a beautiful opportunity to be in conversation with these folks. Like I'm starting to get into the age where I may not be considered a youth anymore, right? And I'm really intentionally creating spaces for younger folks to come into these conversations. And I feel like the New Deal for Youth was able to provide me a platform to connect with other young people. There is this one change maker, Anaya Butler, who's a 14-year-old who, always tells people, I have 8 years of experience doing community organizing. And I'm like, yes, you do. Like, this is your reality. And, like that, it just like fuels my energy even more. And it gives me so much more purpose to continue these conversations and to not be so ashamed about saying, like, what about this? Have we thought about this community? Especially in spaces where, like, are very like single issued. Because the reality, is that if we want to create change, we need to have every single voice that we can at the table. Because so far what we've seen is that one identity, one voice it's not the solution. It in fact creates more problems that, later we have to rectify as a community. So it's been a really powerful experience.
Thanks, Brenda. And I'm going to come to you next, Joseph. So you've been a big part of the group in a New Deal for Youth that's focused on mental health. So I would love if you could share sort of what drew you to that issue area and what you're proudest of in the work we've done so far.
Gotcha. So for me, honestly, I feel like, if you're a colored person living in this country, I feel like you're born with trauma due to the statistics that's going to be thrown on you, due to the hardship that you're going to go through. And it's just like, for my life, I've constantly been through battles, just like any and everyone else. And it's for me, it's just the conversations of what I went about. Those are the conversations I never had growing up. The conversations of explaining to my family, hey, I'm depressed, and them not understanding what depression really means, even though they actually suffer from it as well. For me, it's like mental health is just a conversation that I have always been willing to be vulnerable with, but also learn more about. And so when I saw this opportunity presented by Claps, I was just like, perfect. Something that I love to talk about and that I can talk about forever. Why not? I love it. And I think about the opportunities that I've had within this group. I would say, the thing I'm most proud is about like, and it's like, it's hard for me to specify one moment because it's just like, I've grown to just love our monthly meetings as they take place once a month, even though I would be open to two, but I'm not going to put that out there publicly. But no, seriously, like I love the space that we have. I love the fact that I can, have an off day, but still come here. And by the end of the conversation, I'm smiling. I'm just like, yo, let's go. Like, let's continue the conversation. So I would say all in all, like what I'm most proudest of is the fact that I'm a part of another community. I have people I can reach out to. I have people who can listen without judging. So that's that.
Thanks, Joseph. Monica, just in time. I'm glad you're back. So I want to hear from you. You talked about this a little bit, but Monica, is your internet good? Because you are frozen to me. I'm going to hold. All right, Dewey, I'm going to come to you, and then I'll come back to Monica. Dewey, you have been, thinking about being classed and looking outward. You have been very heavily involved with the White House Office of Public Engagement over the last, I guess it's probably close to a year now. Can you say a little bit about what that has been like and what you've learned from that collaboration?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully Monica can get back on. But so I guess during the transition period, actually, gratefully, I think a lot of it, of course, understanding how young people of color really delivered this election. I think the administration had been intentional about reaching out to young people, groups that represented young people. So really beginning in the transition, we started having weekly meetings with who would become the director of youth engagement at the White House Office of the Public Engagement. So I guess I want to say probably around November. And those have just continued until now. We've been meeting weekly. The summers it's been bi-weekly, but it's been an opportunity, I think, one, for us to tell the administration, directly what we're working on, and also to hear from the other groups. It's about 20 to 30 other youth-led organizations that are represented here, to hear kind of what everyone else is doing, to collaborate together. A couple of like the tangible things that I think have come out of that were really, when this Build Back Better agenda had been coming out, there was a lot of need that we weren't seeing, that young people weren't necessarily having solutions being identified that would help us. And so we, every meeting after meeting, we would talk. Hannah Bristol is the person at the White House, and would ask us what we needed, some more young youth-centered ideas, legislation. So one of the things that they had done was put together a youth, how the Build Back Better plan would help young people specifically, and put together like a fact sheet and outline on that, which we felt was really important and powerful to get out. We also, with that event, got to participate with the Office of Public Engagement and the White House Domestic Policy Council on a public briefing to people on how the Build Back Better plan would help young people, from things like the Earned Income Tax Credit to workforce development to higher education and free community college, really just kind of getting the word out that even though there wasn't any youth-specific language in the plan in the bill, that all of the provisions would, ultimately, what it was for young people. And so we were able to do that. We also co-hosted with the New Deal for Youth and some of our other partners like Generation Progress, I guess it was technically the second ever White House Instagram Live that we did on Instagram, which was, it was really fun. I think a different platform to have try to engage other audiences. So we got to co-host with the White House Office of Public Engagement. And unfortunately, I just heard that their most recent White House Instagram Live featured Vice President Kamala Harris. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get her on ours, but I think maybe one day down the road. And then Olivia mentioned this earlier, but we also were fortunate to be invited to the White House for one of their first public events on community violence interventions, and specifically how youth employment was a community violence intervention strategy. So myself, along with a couple of our change makers, got to go to the White House and meet with Congressman Cedric Richmond, who is a senior advisor to the president as well as the head of the Office of Public Engagement, and then also members of the Domestic Policy Council. So not only one, talk about what their plans were, but wanting to really, again, hear from us, hear what was happening on the ground, how these interventions were being framed. And I think the value add to Nia's original question about this partnership is I'm really learning that it's a lot of it is, we, I think, can all agree on what is needed and more investment, less police. And we can all kind of all agree on that. But I think what the office is really looking for us is to kind of, amplify the good things that they're doing, or they are trying, I think, in a lot of ways. Kind of understanding that political landscape has been really a good learning experience for me. And I think, really delivering on writing op-eds, so we've been able to publish some op-eds on youth employment from Representative Chuy Garcia, from our partners locally in Albany, in Indianapolis, working on some in Atlanta, in Los Angeles. So really kind of getting these stories of these positive programs out there, and just hearing from them like how useful these op-eds, these publications are, because sometimes you write them and you don't really think that they're going anywhere, but getting that feedback that they're getting shared, that this was used in this meeting and this person really loves it, it does start kind of feel like the connections are being made, and we're, having that seat at the table has been really important too. Of course, there's so many things where we'd like to push on, but understanding, I guess, too, it's like what the decision points, the levers of power really are. And we want to, I think it's also important to have that access. So really needing to manage that relationship as well has been certainly something that I've learned from.
Thanks, Dewey. Okay, Monica, you're right on time. So I want to ask you, I'm gonna try and ask you. I know, I hope. Can you tell us about what is different about your work in Denver because of your engagement with class?
Wow. I can give you an example in real time. We were sitting in a conference in, I believe it may have been in LA, or it may have been in St. Louis. And we were talking about justice-connected youth and how they were utilizing aldermen, attorneys, and judges to be able to expunge records in order to help them to build. It might have been in St. Louis. It might have been in real time. So what I did is that immediately, I'm texting our youth liaison. I said, do we have connections with what we have are here? It's called Diversion. It's called Safe City. I said, do we have anybody connected to Safe City? She said, I don't know. I said, I need to know by the time I leave here. By the time I left Denver and my plane touched down, we had a meeting with the director of Safe City. How do we connect and re-engage you? What do we need to do? By that point, I had actually ended up taking curriculum and writing it to create a job readiness program for our justice involved young men. And it was like, I don't have time to play. What are we not system? Well, one of the most beautiful things about this entire connection with class and with the CRY network is that RA understands the people we serve. And because literally with a large portion of our population are disenfranchised, whether it be access for customers with disabilities, whether it be those people who are long-term unemployed, or there's all of those different issues, and even with our youth, we have been given such autonomy to create something out of a need that is identified. And because I'm usually that, I'm like, no, this is not okay, because I have a colleague or my family partner who's in Seattle, and this is what we're doing. So I pick the phone and like, hey, we have a very similar workforce in the system. Tell me what you guys do to implement this, and this. I can take that same information, extract it, go right to it. This is what we need to do. And I thank God for our workforce managers and our assistant directors and directors who say, you know what you said, let's do it. But that kind of boots on the ground, what can we do in real time? Because we have real needs, and real needs sometimes don't have time for red tape. They don't have time to wait for something to go to the floor to be voted on. Because by the time that vote has already gone to the floor, and then whether or not the sky is blue, we have 100,000 children across the nation who've already been killed, disenfranchised, have now become homeless. They become victims of violence, of sex trafficking. Something has happened. We're sitting and twiddling our thumbs waiting for something to happen, rather than being those change makers who are boots on the ground and trying to make those things occur. So with knowing that, the beauty of knowing that the Center for Law and Justice and Social Policy is already, this is what's going to the floor, this is what we need to do. I hear that, I immediately go and say, okay, what are we doing in Denver? What legislative policies do we have in place right now that are impacting what we're not doing? And I've literally been able to have our policy person says, you know what, we've been doing, and I was already working on a policy. I said, how long will it take us to get it done? Take it to get it done so that we can continue to have to support the work that we do. And once we have the support with the work, it makes the work that we do that easier. But to have literally a park that's sitting on the corner in the building center of the district that literally at some is doing amazing, phenomenal work that is changing the way that not only youth are seen, but changing the way that that narrative is composed, but also giving voice back to youth who have been one of the most disenfranchised groups within our nation, who are left to kind of figure it out for themselves. You're 18, no, we're not. We don't have the energy to do that, but we know now that we have a voice that's going to help our voice to impact how we move and to understand there are youth in Philly, youth in Orleans, there's youth in literally in.
Oh, Monica gave up on me. All right, so while we hopefully get Monica back for the end of our conversation, I think someone noted this in the chat, but if you in the audience have any questions for any of our panelists, please do. I know Brenda's so close. Please do put those in the chat. But I have a couple more while we wait for those to come in. Brenda, I'm going to you because I loved your answer to this question when we were prepping for this call. You partner with a lot of people. You work on a lot of things. You're a grassroots organizer yourself. So you have a lot of experience with partnerships, right? What has been different about partnering with Class Team compared to sort of some of the other partnerships you're involved in?
Yeah, I think I forgot my answer when you first asked me, but I think it might be still the same. So yes, I get to do community the work that I do is very hyper local immigration work in DC. If you ask me strategies about DC, who's pro immigration and the council, I can tell you all of that. What's so interesting about DC also is that we have the federal government right there too. It's not a big focus of my immigration work because again, I try to prioritize the community work that needs to happen, but that's also a big asset. So one of the things that I have really come to appreciate about Class is just all of the information that they hold around how to strategize when we're talking to the federal level. And it's honestly really hard to find people who are so close to the federal level and are on your side or have time or want to create the space. And so I remember we had a conversation with one California state representative. And, I read their bio. I was like, okay, I know this is where they stand on immigration. Cool, let me hit these points. But somebody at Class, Juan, who's a strategist for Capitol Hill issues, he came back in our preparation meeting and he gave us all of these details around how has this person voted before? What are some of the things that you should focus on? And this is, such an incredible conversation because, even with this conversation about the budget reconciliation, I have no idea, but a big part of it is immigration. And I can bring deep and real stories on the ground about the work that communities are doing. But, there is that piece of how do I build that? Or how do I create a bridge to tell them those stories? And I feel like CLASP is that. It's really important bridge that we have in our community. Without CLASP, I don't know how much I would be doing somewhere working at the federal level. And all of the conversations that I have been able to bring, especially around young women's issues, stopping the collaboration between ICE and local police, those are really important conversations that I wouldn't really have access to or like know how to strategize if I didn't have a strong partner that supported me and was there like every step of the way, from like giving me insight to, you know, like preparation meetings to like actually being there at those meetings, you know, like cheering me on. So I love the intentionality, and you know, I really love this partnership. This is why I'm here, you know, this is why I continue to organize with them. And yeah, this is why, you know, like I continue to work with the New Deal for Youth. I got to do some of the immigration work, but you know, now we have the opportunity to continue to work and, you know, like strategize. And I can bring those stories, you know, like my group specifically focuses on grassroots organizing. And, you know, like I just can't wait, you know, like to do an action with CLASP and all of the other change makers that I've met.
And Brenda, that was a beautiful segue into the next question I was going to ask, which I'm going to send to Joseph. So, you know, Brenda hinted at it, but what are you most excited about in terms of partnership with CLASP over the next year?
For me, I hate to make this answer so simple, but for me, I would say to continue the work that we've already begun. Just to continue that at least in my mentality, to continue the marathon, to continue to put this work in, continue to, you know, provide the outreach for youth and to continue to be a voice for the youth. That's what I really am excited about. But if I could do a throwback, because I realized I didn't put this in my first answer, but I had to get it out. One thing I really am grateful for and thankful for from this program is the fact that we were all able to actually sit down and create a list of our demands. So there's a few different groups of us that focus on different things. Like I said, my group was my apologies for stumbling over my words, but my group's focus was healing and well-being, and the fact that we was able to come down to a list to what we think is really needed in this country, and the fact that we were able to get the go-ahead from all of our partners and youth that's involved really did put a smile on my face. So I guess I would say I would love to continue to be a part of those projects and continue to just let my voice be heard and provide the voice for others.
Thanks, Joseph. And I think this is going to be the last question, which did come in from the audience. I'm going to throw it to you, Dewey. What do you see as some of our biggest challenges in the work that we're doing? And maybe sort of how are we dealing with that?
Oh boy, what a question. I think, in this environment now, in reconciliation, there's so many different priorities, and we continue to feel like young people of color are not necessarily being heard as much as we need to be. We put out this data portrait about called Why We Can't Wait last year. And to be honest, like there's not much action that members of Congress and policymakers have done since then that have really been squarely targeted to young people and young people of color. I think there's so many different competing, almost it feels like competing areas of attention. We heartbroken by this immigration ruling on Sunday, but we're continuing to fight for that. There's all these pieces that could fall out, and it feels like we're really close to getting something really big and transformative done. But at the same time, every day it sort of feels like there's a new thing that might, it's delayed. The more it gets delayed, the more, and I'm looking at Olivia right now too, because we've been working on this very closely, but the more chances things have to fall off. So I think that's been a challenge for me, really trying to, keep the drumbeat going, because it's also just, we've been trying to keep this drumbeat going for years now, and we really do want to see it through. But how are we dealing with that? I think it's the energy that the change makers bring. It's every month. I think sometimes we meet at 7 to 9, and I'll be honest, sometimes I come in at 6:30 and I'm a little like whiny and complaining about doing that. But by the end of it, absolutely, I think we're so grateful to be here. The energy is just like so uplifting. We open mics and the talent is incredible. The space is just so great. I think that really energizes us, knowing that we have this group of change makers. We're expanding, we're adding new change makers, we are in the process of adding new change makers, adding new partners, and the energy, I think, around it makes it the drumbeat easy to maintain.
Thank you all so much. Like I said, I knew I chose the right people to be on this panel. Please join me in thanking all of our panelists with a virtual round of applause or a thumbs up or whatever you'd like to do. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. And, you know, feel free to follow up, reach out if you want to connect with any of these amazing folks, because I get to talk to them a lot. And I love it. So thank you all. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to our partner, Hillary Pennington from the Ford Foundation, to share a few reflections with us. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Hillary.
Thanks for that. I'm unmuted. Oh, I'm great to be you. And I'm really thrilled to be here today to get to listen to this session and just keep learning from your work. And I'm really speaking on behalf of the partnership of funders who have come together to support this work. And we came together across really different funding areas. Some of us work on education, some on democracy, some on social justice, some on youth development. But we had a shared concern, which was what was happening to young people in this country at this time. And we had a hope and a question. And that was, you know, how might it be possible to stimulate big, ambitious thinking about how to meet the multiple intersecting needs that young people face, you know, a new deal for youth. And this was before there was a grant to CLASP and this work on CLASP, because we asked ourselves who might be best suited to lead such an effort. And we actually asked a couple of different organizations to give us some thoughts and proposals. And no surprise to any of you, the obvious answer was CLASP. You know, for so many different reasons, you know, the way that it has its long history of advancing issues around youth and connecting it to other issues like childcare and immigration and income supports and work supports, worker justice, poverty, all the things that we have talked about together. But even more than that, and your panel has just made this come so alive, it was CLASP's commitment to putting young people themselves at the center and asking them to be the ones to do this thinking. And so I just want to say how excited we all are about how this work is evolving, how amazed we are at your energy from those 7 o'clock to 9 p.m. on Friday night sessions, but just the amazing work you do, because you know your own work and setting out priorities and data make it so clear the existential crises that COVID has brought to your generation, and you know, and everything you've been talking about, you know, jobs and mental health and education and earnings, the ways it's forcing you to delay, you know, basic things that we used to associate with, quote, the transition to adulthood, right? Buying a house, forming a family of your own when you are all supporting your elders and your siblings. And it really does seem that across all the pieces of federal legislation that are being enacted or debated now, there isn't a coherent effort to recognize and address the challenges that young people face comprehensively. There is not yet the equivalent of a New Deal for youth. So who is better suited to imagine and articulate and advocate for this than you? You know, you young adults yourselves. So I just want to say thank you. As funders, we are learning from you, and we know that if we are to be good partners, this is an investment that needs to be sustained, not just in this current moment of immense opportunity for transformative change, but also longer term. You know, given that these issues are cyclical and generational, and we have to stick with them over the long haul. And that's going to take all the kinds of groups that are involved in this work that CLASP has brought together, young leaders, movements, think tanks, researchers, all of you. So I just want to say thank you, let you know a little bit about our own partnership journey, and to thank you all for the work you're doing and the energy you bring to it on top of your multiple roles and jobs. So thank you. And back to you, Nia.
Thank you so much, Hillary, and for sharing those words and your reflections and a little bit about what the partnership looks like from your perspective. We're coming to the end of our time together, so we're going to go next to 2 videos, what we like to call champion videos from one of our partners in the administration, and then one of our partners in Congress. So we're going to go to those 2 videos and then we will close out.
A chance to send along my hi all. I'm so happy to get a chance to send along my respect and my support for everything a New Deal for Youth Changemakers and their partners and allies are doing to shine a light on the economic challenges facing young people on International Youth Day. I'm Janelle Jones, the Chief Economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. Since I started this job, I've been focused on helping to make sure our economic recovery is broad and inclusive, because I don't want to see another recovery where we declare victory before everyone truly recovers, especially people of color and other underserved groups that are usually left behind. You know that we're in a moment where we absolutely have to call for transformative change. You're doing your part by joining together to make sure that we keep our foot on the gas and turn our slogans into meaningful improvements in our lives. You've lived most of your lives in an environment where the protections our parents enjoyed have been under attack. We have to change that. We have to invest in preparing you for tomorrow's economy and work to dismantle the inequality that makes the obstacles to economic stability and security that much harder to overcome. So please, keep fighting, keep pushing, keep holding us accountable. Your ideas and energy and experience all contribute to make a real difference. Thanks so much.
Class family, it's good to be with you, albeit virtually, for this very special day. Not only are you justice seekers committed to the work of strengthening our democracy, you are pace setters. You are leading, organizing, mobilizing. You have the courage, the stamina, and the capacity to build and to sustain movements. You are holding individuals and institutions accountable, and you are calling your peers, your parents, and your neighbors to action. You deserve policies that are responsive to your needs and demands, and that's why today we celebrate a new deal for youth. Dr. King said, change can't wait. He's right. We can't wait for policies that meet the moment. We can't defer our hopes and aspirations for the world we deserve. Those very hopes and aspirations lead to healing and transformative change. Some question the maturity of our young people and your preparedness to participate in our political process. I don't. I reject those assertions as your generation rejects the status quo of systemic oppression. Young people are not being naive or impetuous when they say we can and need to live differently. You are all demanding freedom, justice, and safety. The New Deal for Youth policy platform is responsive to the realities of our young people. And I want to thank Dr. Nia West Bay for her leadership on youth policy at CLASP and for empowering our young people to develop unapologetic, visionary, community-centered driven policy demands and policy solutions. I also want to extend my thanks and my congratulations to youth changemakers. Your lived experiences matter. Your voices and brilliance are necessary. In the face of entrenched challenges and trauma, you've started your own businesses. You've rallied, you've stood up, and you've spoken out. When there wasn't a seat at the table for you, you made your own table. When I feel tired, you fortify me. You embolden me in my resolve. This generation is committed to manifesting a brighter future, and I'm committed to pursuing a policy that is youth-led and youth-focused right alongside you. I'm honored and humbled to count you as my co-conspirators and my accomplices in the work of good trouble. I'll leave you with a quote by the incomparable Angela Y. Davis, who was organizing movements for liberation as a teenager and continues that work today. You have to act. You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And you have to do it all the time.
Well, everybody, I take the charge from our sister Congresswoman, as she told us to call her at the first event that we did with her, very seriously. We have a responsibility to radically transform the world, and we have to act like it's always possible. I appreciate all of you being here, and I look forward to your continued partnership in making that vision a reality. Thanks. Have a great afternoon, and we'll take it back to the Latin playlist to play you all out.